Hey guys, welcome back. So with this jumping back into the Thor series, we're picking up with what is the conclusion of Blood of the Fathers. And for this one, not only do we get what is essentially a new origin for Hela, but along the way, we find that Thor discovers a bit of a secret that Loki had kept from him many years ago. And with that said, let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. So for this one, we pick up right where we had left off, with Thor bringing Lausa and the younger Hela to Jotunheim at a time when him and Loki were much younger. And we're told here, with it being claimed for the longest that Hela is the daughter of Loki, this is current day Thor's reasoning for bringing Hela here, so that he can introduce her to her quote-unquote father. But before he does, current day Thor gives Lausa and Hela a bit of a backstory to what's happening in this moment in time, with younger Thor and younger Loki, who many years past had sought shelter at the house of Berglamir, the Jotun king. And with coming here, the two of them couldn't help but to notice that Berglamir had set his eyes on Sleipnir, their steed, which is actually Odin's steed. And the two of them knew the moment that the giant had seen Sleipnir, he would do anything to get his hands on that horse. So Loki and Thor made a bet with the giant king, to where if he won, he'd take the horse, but if they win, they would get the king's knife. And initially with hearing this, Lausa's just like, why would you bet Odin's horse for just a knife? But Thor goes on to tell her that it wasn't just any knife. It was forged by light elves in the depths of Alfheim. It never dulled, yet it could never cut its owner. And in the palm of your hand, it would heat up ever so slightly if falsehoods were uttered in your presence. So from here, Thor goes on to say that Loki set the terms of this wager, with them challenging Berglamir to a battle of strengths, allowing the Giant King to choose an opponent for Thor, and in return, Loki and Thor would choose an opponent for him. And with Berglamir going first, he ends up choosing for Thor to go up against Rasulgur, whose wings are the source of the wind in all the realms. And through the course of this fight, there was a huge storm, there was thunder. Thor even said at the time the seas had roared. And this fight between him and Rasulgur went on for hours upon hours, until finally this mystical eagle yielded, with Thor claiming the victory in his battle of strength, which after had caused all the winds to be still for a fortnight. But with it now being Thor and Loki's turn to choose a champion to go up against Berglamir, Loki then calls forth Moira, who he initially introduces as a thing of many names. And on the surface, Moira just seems to be a very unassuming yet large spider. And because of her appearance, the giant believes that she's just some sort of joke, at least until the challenge jumps off and the Giant King discovers that he can't even get one hit on Moira. And as Thor continues to narrate this fight, he elaborates on what Loki had mentioned as far as Moira being known of many names, and Thor says the most common of these names is Fate, and not even the Giant King, Berglamir, could defeat Fate, so he eventually yielded. But just after this, we then take a step back into the present day, where we find Runa making her way to Latveria with the Disir, who initially want to go after their former master, Hela, but under Runa's lead, they're here to help. But even with them just arriving here, we're told that Hela fears Runa and the Disir. But again, with them being here to help, Hela tells them that she'll go after Doom, and Runa tells her that they'll go after Nidhogg. But just before we get into that, we jump back over to Jane, who, like we'd seen before, had already found Odin and Bor. And while they're waiting for the others outside, Odin has this moment where he opens up and he tells Jane that there was a time when he wanted to be one with the heavens. He wanted to be the soil and the water. He wanted to be indispensable. He wanted his unlikely death to be felt throughout the realms. But at some point, it changed. And as he continues, Odin goes on to say that he'd seen the funeral that was held for him, the one we had talked about in Thor Legacy issue 750. And Odin goes on to say that it was dignified, beautiful. It was everything that he had wanted. But as he heard his son speak of his life, stories of battles and war, of strength and cunning, Odin wonders if they ever knew what joy they brought to him and what unbridled delights they were in his life. And while they're here, Jane asks Odin what was Thor like when he was young, and he tells her Thor was a scoundrel, foolhardy and courageous, a little naive, but anyone can seem naive being next to Loki. And Odin even says that the two of them didn't really know that he knew about the things that they were up to, but Odin did, and even still he was proud of them, proud of their courage, their ingenuity, and their gall. And straightway from here, we go back into the past, with present day Thor filling us in and now narrating these events in real time. But at this point, the Giant King Berglamir, he discovered who Moira truly was, and he believed that the two of them had scammed him. so they then put the young Loki in restraints so young Thor came back to fight off the giants. And at the time of this young Thor fighting these giants for hours, he never knew how Loki actually got away. Not until now, because it's here where present day Thor finds out that all these years ago, Loki just took the knife and left Thor to fight those giants all by himself. So as you may have guessed, Thor is upset about it with him discovering the truth of this secret, but even still, he continues to do what he came here to do. But upon present day Thor greeting younger Loki, Loki initially believes this to be some sort of trick, but with present day Thor telling him that he's his brother, there are literally no lies detected by the knife that would have heated up had this not actually been Thor. But even with the knife confirming this, Loki has his own ways of making sure that this is Thor. Because right away, Loki hits Thor with the, oh, do you remember the time Balder wooed the lady, so on and so forth, which was kind of a true story with some of the facts and the names mixed up. So then when present day Thor corrects Loki and tells him how it really happened, this confirms to Loki that it's actually his Thor and not just some homicidal variant or something of that nature. But with Loki telling Thor that he's intrigued and to go ahead and speak his purpose, Thor lets him know that it's more so about Loki's purpose because he's come to bring Loki his daughter, the goddess of death, which now, as we're shown, this is the way that Hela's story begins. And much like present day Thor remembered the moments leading up to this as memories from his past, back in the present day when Doom returns to his castle, we find that Hela remembers much of this as well, because when Doom comes back, he confronts her saying that she knew all along, only for Hela to tell him that she knew the beginning and went on to hypothesize the rest. But she had no idea that Doom was sacrificing souls, so Doom tries to quickly explain that he's not doing this for himself. And Hela, she understands that. She even goes on to tell him that he's not wrong. His world is broken, and it's difficult to see who the enemy is. But even though she admires his fight and his willingness to act, she goes on to let Doom know if he ever comes near the souls of Hell again, she will grind his bones to sugar her tea. And it's funny hearing this, because I just imagine being there in the background, instigating, because I'd have said something like, "She said you sweet, boy," and that would have caused all kind of problems. But at this point, Hela goes on to let Doom know that he'd saved her life once, and she warns him to leave now before the Asgardians find him. But going forward with her showing this grace, they're even. And from here, we go back to Jane, who's with all the dead inside of Doom's knockoff afterlife. We first find Odin saying that he's ready to meet the end, just moments before they realize that it's all actually over, and all of the dead can return to their respective afterlives, with some of them returning to Valhalla and the others returning to Hell. And as they go, both Odin and Bor give way for their men to pass first as a bit of an honor to the men who died in their name, and Odin tells Jane to remember what he told her, so she lets him know that she'll tell Thor. But in this moment, with Odin finally stepping into Valhalla, it's given much emphasis on how this is the end for Odin's reign, the end of the age of Odin, and the beginning of the age of Thor. But from here, heading back to the past, we find that present-day Thor gives minimal instructions to Loki concerning Hela. So he just tells him that he had to keep her away from grandfather, so it's probably best that they keep her away from their father as well. So Thor instructs Loki to take her to Angerboda, since Loki was already on his way to give her that knife. But from here, Thor and Lausa leave Hela with Loki, and they go on to return to their respective times. But as Thor goes on to guide Lausa through the time storm and back to her future, before she departs, she attempts to warn Thor about something terrible that is coming in his future. But Thor stops her, and he tells her not to let him know anything outside of what his future self instructed her to say, which, like we'd seen, had been said already. But as she leaves, she then tries to get Thor to start her training at an earlier age, but Thor's just like, yeah, nice try. But from here, he then sends her on her way. And as he arrives in the present, he helps Runa and the Disseer to finish taking down Nidhogg. And as soon as he does, he then asks Runa what happened with Doom. So she then tells him that Hela said she would handle it, so Thor's like fine, but he then tells them that Doom had a book of ancient Asgardian spells, so he instructs them to retrieve it and bring it to Asgard. To where then next, Thor makes his way to Jane, asking where's Odin, and she goes on to tell Thor the message that Odin had given her to tell him. And the message was a story about a king who had finally found his way home. In this story, Thor remembers it's the same bedtime story that Odin told him as a child, which in a way for them had turned into a bit of a game, because as a child Thor would ask, what about the rabbits? Then Odin would play along like, oh yeah, I forgot about the rabbits. And this game would keep the story going because young Thor never wanted it to end. So with Odin telling Jane to give Thor this message, it lets Thor know that his father is truly gone and Odin's era is truly over. And from this moment forward, the era of Thor truly begins. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons and also welcome the new patrons for this month, Brandon V and Damian G. And if there's anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/Dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.